Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. In July, multiple news outlets reported that federal investigators had begun probing the origin of twin allegations against then Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. In February 2019, Fairfax was accused of sexual assault by two women the same week that the state's governor, Ralph Northam, was in the press for a yearbook photo possibly showing him in blackface or in a Klan outfit. The allegations against Justin Fairfax came at a crucial and chaotic moment when Northam was being presented to resign or pressured to resign, and political power looked up for grabs. Ultimately, the series of events that unfolded cleared the way for Terry McAuliffe to run for Virginia governor in 2021, a race he lost to current Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. Justin Fairfax has adamantly disputed the allegations since the beginning, calling for a criminal investigation soon after they became public. In late 2019, he filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS News for their interviews with the two alleged victims, Vanessa Tyson and Meredith Watson. In it, Fairfax makes the case that the allegations against him have several inconsistencies and accuses his political rivals of trying to orchestrate the wide dissemination of the women's stories. Fairfax's defamation suit was ultimately dismissed by a judge. However, the FBI, which is tasked with investigating public corruption, is now investigating some of the same material. Now, in the era of cancel culture and the presumption of guilt, more new twists continue to emerge, including, among other things, a sensational opinion piece in the Washington Post by Sophia Nelson that was accompanied by the headline, "I regret calling for Justin Fairfax to resign." Nelson writes that, "Thankfully, I was among the journalists who reviewed the new information, and I was stunned by what I learned. As a Black woman who was a victim of sexual assault as a young girl, I had immediate empathy for the women who accused Fairfax. After all," Nelson wrote, "we should believe women when they share their stories, right?" Of course, but looking back now at how hard I was on Fairfax, I think I was wrong. I think we all were. Shaming people and canceling careers never advanced civility or fostered mutual respect. Once someone is labeled a racist, a rapist, or a homophobe, it's over without due process. Cancel culture is more than some catchy political phrase. It's happening to people every day, and its effects, I should say, are damaging and lasting. Joining us on Let It Be Known now is the former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax and journalist Lauren Burke, who remained in the trenches with Justin throughout this ordeal. It's good to see both of you.
It's great to see you too, Stacey. Hey, Lauren. How you doing?
Oh, yeah.
So let's just jump into it. I'll start, Justin. I know Lauren has, she has like a treasure trove of information on this. She's been sharing throughout, and not just recently, but throughout from the beginning. She's been sharing some really, really great information about this. Of course, she is a fantastic investigative reporter herself. So, but Justin, you saw I'm going to go backwards here. Sophia's opinion article. We'll start there and we can work our way back. But you saw that article. What did it mean to you that she essentially gave this great public apology to you?
You know, I was very grateful to Sophia, and I thanked her for her courage, for her integrity, for her willingness to tell the truth. And that's really what's been missing now for the last 3.5 years. Stacey, these accusations are completely fabricated. They're false. They were politically motivated. We knew that from day one. And you also, as you recounted the history and the timing, they were done at the precise moment that there was speculation that I might ascend to the governorship, when, as you said, Governor Northam then found himself in trouble with regard to the racist photos that had been revealed in February of 2019. There were people and operatives who went immediately, sprang into action to try to smear me. They literally, we have text messages from people connected to Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney. Thad Williamson was a top aide, his wife, Adria Scharf. They were texting with Vanessa Tyson literally that weekend and saying, Ralph Northam may be forced to resign tomorrow, Thad and I think your story needs to get to the local press today, all caps. They had a signal communication that said Monday action. You'll recall that Governor Northam's story came out on Friday. Text messages went back and forth Saturday and Sunday. And then boom, on Monday, February the 4th, 2019, that's when this accusation, which previously had been investigated by the Washington Post a year before, and they didn't publish it because it's uncorroborated, it's untrue. But because they couldn't get it in any other way through a responsible media with standards and practices of publication, they said, we just got to get it out there somehow because we got to smear this guy today so that he won't become the next governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. It really is going to go down in history as one of the greatest scandals with regard to race, politics in the history of Virginia and of our nation.
And Justin, before I get to Lauren,
Sure.
first, let me ask you a couple of things. One, these women, did you know them? And how, if you did, how well did you know them?
Yeah, my 25 and 21-year-old self knew them. I'm 43 years old, happily married, love my family very much. And part of the smear is having to talk about things that happened 15 and 20 years ago. I shouldn't have to do that. They're not true. But going back and for the purposes of clearing my name, I'm happy to do that.
But
So
let me ask you this. You knew them and what you knew of them. Let me ask you this way too. Were you surprised that they would make such allegations?
Well, I was utterly shocked because the allegations aren't true. And so when someone fabricates something about you, I think that shock is the correct response. When someone says you did things that you did not do, they even said that I was places that I was not. So for instance, Vanessa Tyson goes into great detail talking about how she met me on the first day of the convention in Boston on July 26, 2004. She says we had this conversation and we struck up this great friendship and had mutual friends and we're having all these great interactions. And I wasn't even in Boston that day. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so there were so many provably false things about this. There were fabricated, really fabulous things that were said. And it's clear that there's retroactive fabrication, right? And so you can do that really to anybody and with anybody. And it's unfortunate. That's what our politics have become about. But there are so many people connected to this. Terry McAuliffe, LeVar Stoney. And as you mentioned, Terry McAuliffe then ran again, which was part of the plan to begin with. And so I think everybody needs to be held accountable who was involved in this.
And how, you mentioned your family, wife, children. How did they, particularly your wife, but you had kids involved too. How did the family deal with this?
Yeah, and I guess part of the question is how the family continues to deal with this, because this smear has been going on now for nearly 4 years, and it really is. It's really cruel what's been done, and that's something that Sophia and we also did a podcast. Again, I want to laud Sophia Nelson for what she's done. She was one of the few journalists, along with yourself, Stacey, who you're a truth teller. You, Roland Martin, Sophia Nelson, Sylvia Alston, Avis Jones DeWeaver. There are just some real truth tellers out there who cut through all of the political sensationalism, cut through all of the fabrication. They say, what is the truth? And so, my wife and my children, they have fared so well through this, in part because of our extraordinary family. They've rallied around us, our friends, our faith has really carried us through. And it's a cruel thing to do to somebody. Our daughter was 8 years old when this happened, and our son was 9 years old. And the people who have engaged in this, again, we mentioned the two false accusers, Terry McAuliffe, who called for my resignation within 3 minutes of a press release. You talk about a lack of due process. Would Terry McAuliffe want someone to do that to him or to his son or to a member of his family? I don't think he would. In fact, I know he wouldn't. And so those, were some of the actors, but there were so many more. Deborah Katz, attorney Nancy Erica Smith. I mean, they just continue to make these vile statements. They have for 4 years, Stacey, avoided any form of investigation. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary to make that kind of claim and then to fight against an investigation for 4 years. It tells
you think that they'd want an investigation, they'd want justice. I'm gonna bring Lauren in because Lauren, it was very important, very interesting too. You're a woman, Black woman. You read what Sophia Nelson wrote, which is so true, that once someone is labeled, especially a rapist being one of them, it is really over, and there's really no due process in this era of Me Too and era of cancel culture. So this believe the woman, it comes right up with all of that. And yes, you should take allegations seriously, no matter who's making them. But Lauren, it was very brave of you to stand by for 3.5 years. That you never wavered. How difficult was it for you? Especially seems like you were on an island by yourself.
No, not difficult at all, because I was the person who was watching firsthand what was going on in the background with this entire situation. And interestingly enough, when you're in journalism, as long as we've been in journalism, you kind of know BS when you see it. One of the things that liars tend to do is they tend to change their story over time or modify their story. Justin said the same thing on day one as he's saying now. There's been absolutely no change whatsoever. The other thing that you almost absolutely never see is somebody who's in any trouble, who knows in the back of their mind that they're in trouble, ask for police involvement. That never happens. I've never seen that happen with anybody white, with anybody black, with anybody in politics. I've seen a few politicians ask for internal investigations at like the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House, but certainly not involving like law enforcement, like real law enforcement. So anybody who sits down for 3 hours with the FBI with no attorney present, effectively under oath, because of course you cannot lie to the FBI unless you want to get into a hell of a lot of trouble. That's something that I think stands out. It also stands out to me that the people making these serious criminal allegations never want to be investigated by anybody. They disappear the second that Justin mentions in April of 2019 that I'm going to contact prosecutors. He then contacts prosecutors and they disappear into thin air. Now, if you're telling the truth, I'm not sure why you care about whether or not prosecutors are involved or not. You just go in and tell your story. Then upon the FBI showing up and asking questions of 5 and 6 people, one of their attorneys, the attorney for Miss Watson, Nancy Erica Smith, comes out and says, is angry that the FBI is involved. Why are you angry if the FBI is involved if your client is the victim of a crime? If your client is the victim of a crime, you should want law enforcement involved. Now, I'm biased. I've got more than just a few law enforcement characters in my family, including my father and my nephew. But I will just say this to you, that all is very suspicious to me, just as it is suspicious to me when people sit around for 13 years not saying anything about anything, and those same people who sit around for 13 years with no corroboration are talking endlessly about their father and incest and talking endlessly about sexual violence and working at rape crisis centers, and yet nobody says anything about.
And these are all documented.
Right. And this is a complete stranger that I met at the DNC in 2004 who has no power over me. And somehow I can't find the police at the 2004 convention, which, by the way, I was at. And obviously I did not know Justin Fairfax at the time. I didn't know who Vanessa Tyson was at the time. But I do remember at the time how heavily law enforcement laden that convention was, it being the first after 9/11. And so all of that is sitting out there. Nobody on that side, nobody on the accuser's side is interested in law enforcement, is interested in talking under oath, is interested in filing charges, is interested in cops, and not interested in any of that. Somehow they're just not interested in any of those things. And that to me is very suspicious. And the media in this is another separate story.
This is where we're going right now, Lauren. In fact, I was going to ask Justin that in addition to what Lauren's saying about law enforcement and folks not wanting to go under oath, you also had the struggle of getting a listening ear from the very folks who are supposed to be putting out the truth, putting out information anyway, and that is the news media. The news media turned their back on you quick.
Well, that's right. And, it's really fascinating because, of course, when this all first started, when you had these people wanting to throw these accusations out there, we had the media beating down our door. They're calling my phone. They're blowing Lauren's phone up. They're showing up at my house. They're badgering us. We got to talk to you. We're hearing these allegations and, we're hearing more. And so they would not stop. It was incessant. Right. And now that the truth is coming out, that these were fabricated and politically motivated, radio silence. Right. It's like, pulling, my wife's a dentist. It's like pulling teeth, trying to get the media to admit that these things are not true and to investigate them. I mean, it's really unbelievable. I mean, Sophia Nelson, again, brave journalism. She went out, she looked at the facts. And as she said in her piece in the Washington Post, she looked at the evidence. And what's really interesting about that is for about 3 years, the same Sophia Nelson, who also was brilliant then, but she didn't have this information. She didn't have the facts. And so she
admitted she admitted she was on the bandwagon.
He was on the bandwagon and hard, right? And was saying Justin Fairfax did this, and I can't, and he must be lying, and I don't believe him, and they must be telling the truth, because why would they lie? All the things you hear over and over and over again, where people just mindlessly rehash this stuff, right? Without ever asking a very basic question: is it true? And here's the problem where we are now. Once people are finding out that it's not true, it is incredibly difficult to get the media or politicians or lawyers or anybody else to admit that they were wrong, to admit that these weren't true. And frankly, part of the reason for that, Stacey, it's not just ego, it's that, and it's not just political operatives wanting to continue a smear campaign to do their own thing. LeVar Stoney's telling me he was going to run for governor in 2025. I mean, they want to keep the smear going. Terry McAuliffe may want to do some more, but here's the biggest issue. They can't deal with the enormous consequences of what it means that this smear campaign is unraveling. I would be the only African-American governor in the entire United States of America today. And we obviously, Governor Glenn Youngkin is now governor. That all in part resulted in large part because Terry McAuliffe and LeVar Stoney wanted to smear me. Not only that, but we have a 400-year history, Stacey, as you know, of black males being falsely accused. And now in front of the world, you are seeing maybe the most high-profile example of people smearing a black man with fabricated allegations of sexual assault. And now that those are unraveling, this is going to be historic in terms of what's happening. So no one wants to admit that.
Justin, let me ask you this too, because politics today, as particularly in the era of Donald Trump, it's totally different than it was, and I'm sure you can attest to that, than even 10 years ago, right? It's all about this gotcha, this smearing.
Yep.
Has it soured you on politics at all?
You know, it has not. I mean, I've actually never been the biggest fan of politics. I have always been a big fan of improving people's lives through public policy. I mean, politics is a necessary way that you have to engage in order to, you have to win elections in order to change, public policy and the public debate. But I will say this, it's been cruel. It's actually sparked me to want to really focus on an agenda of anti-cruelty, right? Really focusing on getting cruelty out of our politics and changing people's lives for the better. And so you're right. It's interesting, though, that you mentioned Donald Trump as well, because, of course, he's been accused of everything under the sun. I mean, this guy's actually been investigated. I mean, he's been impeached twice. And yet you still don't have people going after him as much as they were going after me for things that were totally made up and thrown out there. So here's the other piece. Race matters. Because a year after, and I know you know this, a year after I was falsely accused, Joe Biden was falsely accused. And literally,
there was a whole different approach to that.
I was a 180, right? Some of the exact same people who were calling for my head and saying he must resign and this must be true and Terry McAuliffe must go in 3 minutes. Some of the exact same people went radio silent when Joe Biden was accused and or even defended him and said, you know what, we now need due process. And they rediscovered the ability to investigate things. And they were actually looking into the accuser and her background to say, is her story true? Who is this person?
Well, going back to Trump, and of course, Lauren reported on this. Everybody reported on this. Before he won, there was allegation, and there was him with Billy Bush saying, grab them by,
outrageous.
Yet, here's an individual after 4 years received 75 million votes.
Yep.
Does your wife? Let me ask this question, and perhaps you understand that it's hard, and you definitely understand how hard it is for families, but wives in general. Does she have any reservations about you staying in the political arena?
Well, if for those who know my wife, she is not very political at all. I mean, she cares deeply about people. She's a dentist, as I mentioned. I'm very biased, but she's the best dentist in the world, and she's incredibly accomplished. And
I'm coming to see it. Then,
please come see it. You got a great smile; she'll make it even better. But she's really extraordinary, and so she is beautiful mother and sister and daughter and dentist and professional. And so she's always been about helping people and lifting people up. But politics has never been something she's that interested in part because people are so cruel, because people will stoop to extraordinary lows, but she knew that there are folks who go into the gutter, and she also knows how tough
But
I
this
am.
was, I mean, all that Lauren, you, and now the FBI and others are bringing out, all that's true. I mean, this was worse than dragging you through the mud. I mean, this was horrible.
Well, anybody with half a brain who's a spouse of anybody in elected office would have to be very nervous about what's going on.
Right, and that's where I was going, Lauren. We have a situation, and you can probably, I'm sure you can speak to this too. There's a situation that's playing out publicly on social media. Sonia Douglas, and her husband in that situation now is a little slightly different in that it's not sexual assault allegations. It's just that allegations of his infidelity, and she wants a divorce, and they've been going. I mean, she's really been on Twitter. She didn't want him running again. It was supposed, according to her, the family was to come first.
The bigger piece, as we saw this morning with Herschel Walker's kid, Christian Walker,
is
that we live in an era where everybody wants to air every personal moment and every synapse in their brain on Twitter and Facebook. That's really what the politics are actually not new. The smear campaigns are actually not new.
Right.
The means of delivering false information are new. And the fact that the media, particularly the big media, the New York Times and the Washington Post specifically, are terrible at dealing with that issue and haven't figured out
Lauren,
that they're getting played.
Yeah,
okay?
I'm gonna let you continue. I just want to make it clear what I was saying was basically asking, is your wife ready to still deal with stuff like that? But let Lauren go on, and then you can pick that up, Justin.
Well, I can answer that for Justin. Nobody's wife or spouse is ready to deal with any of this. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm going to a political event right now in Hampton, Virginia, for somebody who's announcing tonight in Hampton, Virginia, for a city council race. And I know I will have this discussion with somebody in there. I've had more people come up to me, Republican and Democrat, male and female, expressing concern about the spouse that they have that's in political life because of this insane situation that we find ourselves in now. I talked to Wes Moore the other day. He did not bring it up, nor did his spouse. I actually brought it up to him. But the point is, anybody at any moment on Facebook and Twitter could get hit with some nonsense, and this media will platform it and publish it, because the way that defamation law works is that if you're an elected official, you can't meet the malice standard. It's as simple as that. And so until Tom Sullivan is gone, we will be dealing with this. But to get back to the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are the two publications that everybody copies and follows, and getting back to race a little bit, we watched with Justin Fairfax situation a complete 180, 360, whatever you want to call it, on Joe Biden, from people like Ruth Marcus, from people like Karen Tumulty, from people like Stephanie Saul, who completely suddenly found due process and suddenly figured out how to investigate and wait before writing something that they never found with Justin Fairfax.
And let it be known that this is not, you guys are not knocking President Biden. You're knocking the coverage.
No, I don't care. I don't believe or disbelieve it. I'm talking about the way the media handled the Biden case versus the Fairfax case. Right. And it was completely different. I mean, I haven't studied Tara Reid or anything, but I know, any dummy could sit up there and see what happened with Tara Reid. She got investigated. They were investigating at the New York Times and the Washington Post that she didn't pay her rent in the 1990s. They were talking to her neighbors, her brother. They never did any of that with Justin's case. They assumed he was guilty. Ruth Marcus and Karen Tumulty and Stephanie Saul, who never called me before the New York Times put this in. It's Justin, important to name the names. This
Lauren is naming names.
I love her. She's awesome.
This is not the type of journalism that we should be. You're talking in this particular case about publishing serious criminal allegations before checking and investigating. That is what they did. Right. Okay. At least Ruth Marcus, when Biden happened, wrote a whole big thing about how, I rushed to judgment. She should have actually had her buddy there, Karen Tumulty, write the same thing, because Karen Tumulty wrote 2 articles on Justin that I finally called her. I said, Karen, what are you doing? Like, you don't know what happened 20 years ago. I mean, like, how do you think you know?
Well, Justin, it seems like everybody except Justin, it seems like everybody except those who were there knew what happened 20 plus years ago. But so, Justin, so now what's next? That's the thing. Okay, so you're still not getting the, like you mentioned, Roland Martin and some others, the Black press as well. But you're still not getting that same. It's almost like when there's this huge story, it's on the front page, and then when something different happens, when they find out, oh, it may not be true, or a correction is buried, somewhere in page 30 at the bottom of the page. Are you finding now with this, particularly with Sophia's piece in the Washington Post, are media now starting to open their ears a little bit more to you?
They are, but I think this is really a seminal moment in a lot of ways in American history. As Lauren said, no one can really point me to an example where someone has begged for criminal investigations for 4 years into allegations they know not to be true and have proof that are not true. I've met with the FBI voluntarily for 3 hours with no attorney because I know these things are fabricated and false. Not one other person involved in this will step foot.
But you're not supposed to go without an attorney, right?
Here's the thing. As a former federal prosecutor and as somebody who knows he's 100% innocent, I knew exactly what I was doing, and which is to say, this is why this is such an important and seminal moment in American history, right? No one's ever done this before, right? We're doing it because it's false. We're unraveling perhaps the biggest, most racially charged smear campaign sort of in history. And we also should talk about this a little bit, because we're talking a lot about these false allegations, and we get kind of hung up on those. It's important to talk about why they're false, but think about the implications of it all, right? I already talked about this. I'd be the only African-American governor in all 50 states, right? We have 0. But because Terry McAuliffe and LeVar Stoney and other actors and Democrats, Nancy Smith wanted to smear me right away, so I can't be governor, we have 0. Okay, so that's number one. So every African-American in America should know that. Here's what else they should know. I was a partner at an international law firm where I was doing very well. Former federal prosecutor, went to Duke University, was on the board of trustees, Columbia Law Review. My sister-in-law introduced Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to the United States Senate in her hearings, her best friend for 35 years, one of them. My oldest brother's the dean at American Law School. My great-great-great-grandfather was freed from slavery 60 years before the Civil War. And people, I'm in Fairfax, and people believe they could destroy all of that. 220 plus years of that with a press release. We're not in the 1600s. We're not in the 1700s. My great-great-great-grandfather, Simon, in 1798, when he was freed by Lord Fairfax, he got more due process than I did as Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia in 2019, 220 years later. So this is a moment where we have to stop and pause and think. Because the implications are so much greater than one smear campaign of so many that go on. But this was done intentionally. They went to the 400-year-old 1619 playbook. How do you take a guy who had never been accused of jaywalking, who had a top secret security clearance? How do we stop him immediately with the nuclear bomb? We falsely accuse him of sexual assault. And once we do that, everybody else turns and shuts their brains off. But you know what? I'm not letting that happen. My family's been free since 60 years before the Civil War. We're not going backwards. And I don't want any African-American to go backwards. I don't want our country to go backwards. And here's another thing that's very important. By fabricating these allegations and then putting them on television, and CBS with Gayle King and New York Public Radio 2.5 years later, after it was known that the stuff was not true, and the New York Times and the Washington, every outlet that blasted this stuff for years, and it is now radio silent in this moment. What they've done is they've also weaponized the pain of women and of men that this has actually happened to. Right. So you're taking people. I've had women come up to me, including in some cases elderly women. I had one at a church service, an African-American woman, probably in her 80s, came up to me in tears and said, Justin, I don't think you did this. And I just needed you to tell me that personally. I said, no, ma'am, I promise I didn't do this. She's crying. She said, I never thought you would do this. And I'm glad you told me that because I was raped. Right. And that's what she said to me. And she's crying. And so what I'm saying is the people who are vile enough to fabricate this stuff and do all this just because we got to get Justin Fairfax, we got to stop him at all costs. They are weaponizing the real pain of tens of millions of people. And that's why I have fought so hard, not just for my family and not just for politics. I've fought because they've hurt so many people. And this has got to stop in our society. We've got to stop the cruelty that is represented by what they are doing. And the fact that Deborah Katz, Nancy Erica Smith, Terry McAuliffe, LeVar Stoney will not walk into the FBI. They actually were mad that the FBI is involved. They didn't want to go to the prosecutors. They don't want this investigated. For 4 years, they have fought this, right? And so what people need to start to understand, if this stuff was false, it's frankly criminal what they've done. And here's the other thing. No one would want this done to them. Not one person I've ever met.
And how does Justin Fairfax get any redress from this?
Well, in a few different ways. One, we actually have a $35 million lawsuit going on right now against New York Public Radio, who once again, 2.5 years after CBS broadcast these false claims. And CBS's argument, by the way, to the district court and to the circuit court, Fourth Circuit, was, well, we didn't know everything that we know now at the time of publication. As you know, defamation law, New York Times v. Sullivan, it measures it at the time that they were published. So their basic argument was, well, we didn't know all that. And in fact, they conceded to the judge, had we known these certain very important facts, including the Duke allegation, where there is a literal exonerating eyewitness who was there who said this didn't happen. They said we didn't know that in advance. And had we known it and still published it, then yeah, you'd have actual malice. Well, New York Public Radio comes along 2.5 years later. All this has been known by everybody, and they still publish it. And so it's like, at what point does the smear campaign end? So that lawsuit, by the way, October 25th, New York Public Radio has their responses due to our complaint, their motion to dismiss. Look at their response. I bet they don't say that these stories are true. Okay, I bet they don't say the stories are true. And there's more to it. But again, the way we get redress is to stop this from happening to anyone else ever. We got to stop the smears, stop the lies, stop this kind of a tactic to be used really on anybody, but particularly on African Americans. Hold people to account. And all these folks who spilled all this ink with all these columns, assuming my guilt, saying Justin Fairfax needs to speak and 3 questions he needs to answer, and he's got to speak up right now. We think he's guilty. They're radio silent right now. And that is not, as Dr. King said, there comes a point when silence is betrayal. And it's not a betrayal of me. It's a betrayal of the truth. It's a betrayal of the rule of law. It's a betrayal of their own integrity. If they can't admit that they were wrong. And my final point, Stacey, on this is what separates people who did this to me from what Donald Trump does to other people? If you are willing to go out and fabricate something, to smear someone, to never want an investigator, to lie for 4 straight years, to not get law enforcement involved, and then not admit that you're wrong, how do you take the moral high ground against a Donald Trump, right? How do you do that? Because this is exactly what Donald Trump would do to someone. And so we have got to stop this in our society. And again, the implications are dramatic, not just politically, but think about this. The racial disparities that exist in Virginia and in our nation are not being addressed, right? We still have 70% of the juveniles who are in our juvenile justice system are African-American. Right. We're not talking about that because we keep talking about these false allegations for 4 years. We're not talking about the economic disparities. We're not talking about the fact that HBCUs are woefully underfunded. They don't have, 1% of the endowment of these other massive, large institutions. And these things are not going to change because every time we have an opportunity to do it, people get distracted. And they're distracted intentionally. And so here's the thing. I'll be talking with L. Douglas Wilder, a great governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, first African-American ever elected in the history of Virginia, the history of this nation, frankly, to be governor. He has stood up with courage. He, Congressman Bobby Scott, and Senator Mark Warner all stood up with courage to really say we need due process. These things should not happen in our society. But Stacey, this is a moment where we can end this. We can end this cruelty, not just against me and my family, but against Virginians, the women who they've weaponized the pain of for tens of millions of people who this actually has happened to. They are willing to stoop that low to make it up just for political purposes. This has to stop in our society. And right now is the chance to do it.
Well, and one last thing before we let you go, we really appreciate the time, Justin Fairfax. Will we see Justin Fairfax on a ticket sometime in the near future?
Well, I tell you what, you'll definitely see him on a lacrosse field with his daughter and on a basketball court with his son. I can assure you of that. And but I tell you what, we certainly are staying very engaged. We're going to have some really powerful announcements even later this week about some justice work I'm doing to bring justice to some other people, and that'll be national news as well. But we've entirely left that open. And I'll tell you, I've never lost my passion for people, for serving the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia and of this nation. I've done it as a federal prosecutor. And I've done it in my other capacities, not just in political office, but I think there's something so much bigger going on here. I don't want them to be able to do this to anyone else in our society. It is wrong. And the fact that people can't stand up and say it's wrong after 4 years, the fact that people can't stand up and tell the truth, the fact that they don't want an investigation, you have fought an investigation for 4 years. It's outrageous. I mean, it really is. And it's staring us all right there in front of us. And yet you have very few truth tellers. You're one of them. Sophia Nelson is one of them. And I mentioned some others, Sylvia Alston, Ava Jones Weaver, Doug Wilder. So here's the thing, Stacey. This has got to stop in our society. This cruelty, this racism. And by the way, everyone who called for my resignation, there's a lot of politicians out there who jumped and rushed to conclusions, right? Rushed to judgment. Most of them are silent. So Sophia is leading the charge, right? Most of them have nothing to say. For years, they're maligning me, calling me these horrific names, throwing my name around with words and things that I have never done. And yet now when the truth comes out, they're radio silent. And so that's a lack of courage. That's a lack of leadership. And if they can do that to the lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the second African-American ever elected in 400 years, guess what they're going to do to that African-American young man in Norfolk or in Portsmouth or in Danville or in Arlington or in Lynchburg? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to do this and worse. And so that's why this fight matters. That's why I fought this fight. We didn't give up. And I thank you for not giving up on the truth. And can someone at some point simply come out and say, these were fabricated, Justin Fairfax was lied on, and this is a powerful moment in history to change this. We're never going to let this happen again. And if people can't do that, then they don't have the moral authority to lead, and we do.
Well, you heard it. Justin Fairfax, the former lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia, he's feeling vindicated, which is a good thing. And Lauren Burke, of course,
God is good.
Who never wavered one moment, and that is in public and in private. She never wavered.
She's extraordinary.
Lauren,
she's extraordinary.
As we sign off, Lauren, just 30 seconds. I'll give you the last 30 seconds on this.
The last 30 seconds is that we have to be very careful as Black people out here, because there is a move to kill the presumption of innocence and kill due process. Obviously, that connects with white folks as well. But I think for Black folks, there's a special history that we have of trying to clear that bar of the presumption of innocence. It's been particularly deadly for Black males in this history over 350 years. And it connects to this case because there's a lot of people who want to do away with basic due process. It's as simple as that. Thanks, Stacey. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lauren Burke, a journalist and certainly somebody who has worked tirelessly to help Justin Fairfax to clear his name. Thank you so much for joining us on Let It Be Known. We will see you again soon.